Welcome to Rock and Metal Songwriting, where I help you go from riff ideas to fully finished songs. I'm Quincy Kane, and this is day number 13 of my 20-day songwriting question challenge. Today's question is, how do I stop my songs from sounding repetitive? Okay, so we're going to dive into that question, but if you've got a question yourself, feel free to leave it in the chat, and I'll get to it at the end of this presentation, near the end of the stream. If you're watching on the replay, no problem, just leave a comment, and I'll be sure to get back to your question. But today's question, how do I stop my songs from sounding repetitive? And this can be a problem. It's a problem when your song sounds redundant, and it just sounds like the same things happening over and over again. And especially for a lot of beginners, because it might be hard to write a lot of. Another problem is writing too much music, and so there's no sense of continuity, or there's no sense of, you can't identify sections clearly. So I would say it's actually better to be too repetitive than it is to be too chaotic. But it is a problem. You might just have a single riff that you're working with, or a single chord progression, and you're trying to write a song, but it just kind of feels like it's the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to share a few tricks to help you so that your songs can sound more interesting. And you don't necessarily have to write more music. There are a lot of tips, a lot of things that you can do to take what you already have and present it in a way that it doesn't sound repetitive. So really, what causes something to sound repetitive is when the song just sounds like it's more of the same. Nothing new ever shows up. The song just starts and you're like, okay, this is the song, but then it just kind of stays the same. And even if the words are changing, you know, the melody, the chord, the intensity of the song is just all kind of staying the same, and that can make the song start to sound repetitive, and that's when it starts to lose interest, and the listener becomes less engaged, and that's not what we want. We want your listeners to be fully engaged with your songs. So there's really two ways to avoid being repetitive. So the first one we're going to look at is you can change the presentation of what you have from section to section. And then the other thing is you can write clear musical differences from section to section. So you can write more parts, and you're making them clearly distinct from section to section. But let's start with presentation first. I remember my brother, he doesn't really write a whole lot of songs, but several years ago he was working on a song, just something that was, you know, on his heart, something passionate he wanted to get out, and so he picked up the guitar and started writing the song. And maybe you've experienced this before. It feels good when you've just got something you want to express and you write a song, and it feels good to get it out and be like, man, the song just expresses how I feel. But maybe you've experienced this too, where then you go to show somebody. And that's what happened. He went to show our parents, and when he was playing the song for them, he started to notice how repetitive his song sounded. It started to sound kind of redundant, and like it was just going on and on and on. And even though it was very satisfying for him to play for himself, the moment he started sharing it, that's when the flaws started revealing themselves. So he actually came to me, and he was asking if I could help him out. And his problem was he really liked the chord progression he had. He just had a simple chord progression that went something like this. I'm playing that kind of sloppy because I'm in drop tuning right now, and it's in standard tuning. But what he had, he liked that, and he liked the sound that he had, but he was trying to think, how can I keep the same vibe, but without it sounding so redundant? And one of the simplest solutions we had was, okay, well, let's just be clear, you know, let's be more distinctive between the verses and the chorus. Let's let the chorus be big, you know, full-on chords, loud strumming. But when we get to those verses, let's use palm beats. You hear that? Already, it's the same chord progression, but it just sounds interesting. It sounds different than what we had. And then when he gets ready to go to that chorus, he can start to build up. So we didn't change the chords. We didn't write anything new. All we did was change the presentation. So that's something you can do. You might just have a single chord progression or a single riff, and maybe all you need to do is change the presentation. In the verses, you need to find some way to contain it, make it a little more condensed, a little more just smaller sounding and not quite so full on in your face, and save the big loud part for the chorus. And that can be a simple solution to keep your song very dynamic. And so that was one thing that we did, and he was super pleased. It went on to be like a really, really great song, the way it turned out. But it was just a simple solution. We didn't have to write a whole bunch of new music. We just had to take what he already had and just change the presentation. So a few examples of this more specifically to rock and metal. I mean, think of a song like Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's basically 4 chords. The song is basically just the same 4 chords. There's a few variations in there. But notice what they do. In the verses, really the bass takes over, but you could play it with just a clean guitar. You could just pick the notes like that. And then as it starts to build in intensity, you can kind of start strumming and building it up. And then that chorus comes in. And you add that distortion. That's a great trick. Just in your verses, use more of a clean tone or a crunch tone. Use a palm mute. I mean, for that same song, this isn't what they do, but you could just palm mute the root note. Do that for your verses, and then build up. And then strum for the chorus. That's a great way to create dynamic. And it's the same thing for the rest of the band as well. The drums are playing a more contained beat. You're playing maybe with a closed hi-hat, that something that sounds a little more contained, a little smaller. And then you build up in the chorus and you play the big, loud crash cymbals and the open hi-hat, and it has a lot more energy. So even though you're doing basically the same thing, you're changing the presentation of it. It's the same thing with the vocal melody. Notice in the verses, he's singing a lot lower. He's kind of singing in a softer voice, you know. Load up our guns, bring your friends. You know, singing kind of down here. Da, 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 da. But when he goes to the chorus, with the lights on, it's less dangerous. And when he's singing it, you know, he's singing full out. He's practically screaming the lyrics. That's a distinctive difference. It's not the same melody in the verse that it is the chorus. He's got a different melody, so that distinguishes the two. And the melody in the verse is a little smaller, a little, you know, lower, more contained, and then it's more released. It's louder and more explosive in the chorus. So just changing the presentation could be a great way. Now, it's not just a single instrument. That's kind of what we're looking at, but even how you change the band presentation. I've got some music here that I want to share with you. This was a song I wrote called Farewell to Fear. And this song is basically the same chord progression. If I were to play the riff for you, the main riff of the song goes like this. Now, I don't know why, but something about that, I kind of liked it on a loop. I sort of liked that riff, and I didn't feel the need to write a whole bunch of different sections. So if you listen to the song, I'm going to show you real quick. The drums and the bass are basically doing the same thing for the whole song, and I'll show you what I mean. Check it out. This is the intro of the song, just the drums and the bass. Here's the intro. Here's the verse. And I'm kind of guessing here. I think this is the chorus. Here's verse 2. And you might be thinking, oh, that sounds the same. And you're right. That's pretty repetitive, right? That would get pretty repetitive, pretty redundant if that's all there was to the song. But let's add the full band and listen to how I use the other parts of the band to keep it from sounding repetitive, to change it up. So this is the full band now. Keep in mind, the drums and bass are basically doing the same thing. But listen, here's the intro. So we have the guitar with it. Okay, listen to verse 1. Clean guitar, not distorted. kind of picking those notes. We've got these vocals nice and low. Let's listen to the chorus. Go back a little. Got that distorted guitar. Vocals are higher, they're louder. Listen to verse 2. That's what I think is cool, is there's a clear distinction between verse 1 and verse 2. In verse 2, we didn't just go back and do the same thing. Here's verse 1 with that clean guitar. Right here. Verse 2, instead of the clean guitar, we swap it out for this little lead part on an electric guitar. So even though foundationally, those verses are the same thing, the drums and bass are doing the same thing, the melody is singing the same melody, but the presentation is different. We have a little more, we've got that clean tone in the first part that's picking a different vibe. It creates a clear distinction. You could still tell it's the verse. They're similar enough that you can tell, oh, this is the verse, but there's a clear distinction between verse 1 and verse 2. And that's when music gets a lot of fun, is because you can do that with your arrangement by adding other layers or changing certain parts. You don't want to change them completely. Again, if you're going to another verse, you wouldn't want to write a completely new riff, the vocal melody. The chorus has the full-on distorted guitars, really loud, big chords, and the vocals are much higher. Okay, and then hopefully this stream is going well. Okay, I'm getting, oh man, come on. I hope I'm still live. Am I still coming through? Oh boy. All right, I'm just going to keep going. Hopefully I'm still coming through. Sorry, I'm getting some notifications, and I'm not seeing any data on the stream right now. All right. So, as you're presenting the song, all right, hopefully we're back. Hopefully it's playing. So as you're presenting the song, you can add in new layers. That's a great tip, and it's really good to just listen to other artists, listen to other songs, and pay attention. Listen to the verse, and every few measures, try to pick up, do you notice anything new showing up? Like, you might be listening, you're hearing the music, and after a few beats, you notice like a new layer comes in, a new guitar part, or maybe a cool like synth part, or maybe there's another vocal part, like some background vocals come in. Just a new element that shows up in the song and keeps it interesting. So even though the verse might be continuing, the verse isn't over yet, what keeps it from sounding repetitive are those new elements that kind of add to it and create engagement. And think of it, as the listener, that's what helps it from, rather than sounding like you're just hearing the same thing over and over again, it sounds like something new is coming. It's just sort of changing the presentation of what's already there, but it makes it sound like the song is going somewhere. So that's what you want to think about in your own songwriting, is the presentation and adding those new layers to keep it engaging for the listener. Now, you can write clearly distinctive sections, you know. You can have maybe a riff that you play in the verse, and then when the chorus kicks in, you switch to a chord progression. And so just musically, you can tell the difference. You know, an example, with Kill Switch Engage, you can clearly tell the difference. The verse is more of a riff. The song My Curse by Kill Switch Engage. And then the chorus has these big chords. So you don't have to worry about the verse and the chorus being confused with each other because they clearly sound different. So it's really easy to tell when you're in the verse and when you're in the chorus. But even still, you might change the presentation of those things. You might have certain variations so that when you return to those sections, you know, you don't necessarily want verse 2 to sound exactly the same as verse 1. You might go back to that main riff, but maybe you change something. Maybe you change the drum beat a little bit. Maybe there's a new guitar layer that comes in. You might do something so that it's it has enough in common with the first verse that you still recognize that it's another verse, but it has a few new elements to distinguish it from the first verse. And then you can do the same thing with your choruses. You might have your first chorus. One thing I often like to do is the first chorus, I'll leave out some of the vocal layers, the background layers. I'll simplify those a bit, and I'll leave out my lead guitar parts. And then in chorus 2, it's basically the same thing, but now I have those new lead guitar parts coming in, and I have more background vocals coming in. So on the surface, they sound the same, but when you really pay attention, you notice, oh, there's actually more layers going on in the second chorus compared to the first chorus. And then the last chorus, maybe even more layers, and maybe the drum beat changes a little bit. Maybe the vocals have some variation, just slight variations, so that they're similar enough to be recognizable as the chorus, but there's enough distinction between each one that you can tell which chorus it is. Oh, this is the final chorus, the big finale. This is chorus 2. This is like kind of the main chorus. This is chorus 1. This is like a little sampler of the chorus. And I think that brings me to kind of my last tip, which is, yes, you can do simple things like just changing the drum beat. Sometimes you could play the same exact section, but just by changing the drum beat, it kind of changes the feel of a section. And keep in mind, make sure, this is, you can take this advice and apply it how you want, but in my opinion, make sure your song sections are no longer than they need to be. For myself personally, I used to write songs, and they were kind of lengthy. Like, it was hard for me to write a song that was under 5 minutes long. And a big part of that was sometimes I would write an intro, and it just felt right to play it twice. But sometimes just because it feels right doesn't mean it is. Sometimes playing the intro twice is a little bit much. You might be able to cut it in half, and at first it might sound a little jarring, but once you listen to it, you kind of get used to it, and you realize, oh no, this is good. Again, I think a good rule of thumb is to be all killer, no filler. You know, just get to the good stuff. Don't linger on something too long. I think it's better to leave your listeners wanting more than to overstay your welcome. And so I always make an effort to try to trim down my songs as much as I can. Sometimes, yes, you do got to play for a while. And if that's the case, adding other layers can help keep a section interesting. But I try to trim down the sections so that the song is as short as I can get it, so that each section is going to sound good and not be too repetitive or go on too long to where it just sounds like more and more of the same thing. So that's going to be it for that particular question. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions yourself, again, feel free to leave a comment. And if you have any tips, anything that you've tried that has worked for you, be sure to share that. If you're interested in taking your songwriting to the next level and you'd like to work one-on-one with me, there's a link in the description to apply for a free coaching call. That's all for today. Until next time.